Discover the incredible journey. Black Mechanic's hidden talent transforms engineers' heart. Fore. Anthony wiped the grease from his hands, glancing up as the door swung open, letting in a rush of evening warmth and the scent of the nearby diner's fries. In walked Sarah, a whirlwind of determination and desperation. Her sharp business attire and anxious presence were a stark contrast to the dusty tools and rumbling engines surrounding them. "I need your help," she said, her voice sharp but laced with vulnerability. The world saw a black mechanic, immersed in machinery, yet in that moment, Anthony felt each breath drawing him into her chaotic reality. A reality where men doubted her skills at every turn. Rushing through the diagnosis, Anthony felt the buzz of an impending storm within him, a flutter of hope mixed with fear. Her eyes sparkled with appreciation whenever he shared his mechanical knowledge, yet doubts clawed at the edges of his mind. What would she think if she knew the dreams he buried under the weight of the family business? The garage was a sanctuary, but also a prison, keeping him shackled to his father's legacy, while Sarah stood at the brink of what could be a connection that transcended grease and engines. "Before we continue," Anthony stammered, feeling the moment stretch, "I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue." As she listened, Anthony's heart raced. What lay beyond these garage walls? As Sarah dove into her own struggles, expectations, the weight of professionalism, he found himself contemplating a world he had never dared to enter. She saw potential in him that made his stomach churn. The thought of stepping onto a stage, presenting at an innovation conference, terrified him. It was just a moment in time, yet it felt like pushing against an avalanche of self-doubt and the echoing voices of those who had faced obstacles because of their skin. The tools seemed to rattle louder, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering like his wavering resolve. Did he have anything worthwhile to say? Could he rise above mere mechanical craftsmanship? Images of his mentor flashed through his mind, a man who fought and ultimately succumbed to a system that failed him. Would Anthony end up no different, chained to his family's expectations, too scared to let his voice resound? Just as he was beginning to conjoin their threads of suffering and triumph, a wave of anguish washed over him. Could he turn his back on the legacy that had birthed him, challenge the confines of a dusty garage, and say yes to the dream he had tucked away? Racing thoughts collided with the reality of his mundane existence as the alluring potential of his bond with Sarah tugged at him. Caught between a life of concealed talent and the risk of failure looming ahead, Anthony's breath caught in his throat. The countdown to the conference extinguished the flicker of hope that had ignited. Would he find the courage to seize the moment, or would the fear of rejection ground him deeper into the shadows? The insistent grind of the world continued around him, and he stood on the precipice, wrestling with a decision that could redefine everything. Anthony leaned against the workbench, a tangle of metal parts arranged before him, each representing a piece of his predicament. The comforting sounds of the garage felt strangely oppressive now. He could hear the clanking of tools, the muffled conversations of customers, and the distant roar of vehicles outside, yet his focus narrowed to Sarah's presence, which seemed to amplify the chaos in his head. Her unwavering commitment ignited something within him. It was as if she'd handed him a mirror, forcing him to confront the ambiguous reflection of his own aspirations against the gritty backdrop of his father's legacy. He had always allowed himself to be defined by the confines of that garage. Should he risk what little stability he had for a chance to express an untapped part of himself? The thought formed a knot in his stomach. "Why do you care so much?" he asked, his voice slightly shaky, revealing more vulnerability than he intended. Why me? Because you're not just a mechanic, Anthony. You're more than what others see, Sarah replied, an intensity in her gaze that held his attention. I see potential in you that you haven't even begun to acknowledge. In those moments of eye contact, a crack of realization pierced through his uncertainty. Each compliment she offered melted icicles of self-doubt that had thickened over the years. Each word served as a gentle push toward emerging from his self-imposed limitations. But the question lingered, could he evolve into someone who grasped such potential and, more importantly, could he accept that vision of himself? He nodded slowly, not quite convinced, but willing to explore the possibility. I'm still just a guy with a wrench. What if I cannot be more? You won't know unless you try, she challenged softly, stepping closer. Look, I get it. Stepping out of your comfort zone is terrifying, but if you want to be the person you're meant to be, you'll need to put yourself out there. The weight of her words settled around him. Vivid images of bright conference lights flashed in his mind, a stage alive with the energy of ideas sparking from every corner. Would he really stand there, a voice resonating across barriers, or would he remain a face in the crowd, lost in anonymity? The emotional turmoil escalated as he contemplated his options. The pulse of fear and exhilaration coiled tightly together inside him. He had a choice to make: lean into that fear and let it guide his transformation, or step back into the familiar shadows, allowing his aspirations to wither quietly. I've spent so long perfecting my craft, he murmured, but I've never had to speak about it. What if people don't care? Then you'll make them care, she countered, fiery determination lighting up her tone. Your story matters. You're not just telling people how to fix things. You're showing them resilience, passion, and that breaking barriers is possible. The fight brewing within him felt unstoppable now. The flicker of hope transformed into a flame, illuminating paths long obscured by his fears. What would happen if he chose to stand on that stage alongside her instead of gracing the garage floor forever? His heart raced as the enormity of the decision loomed ahead. It wasn't just about him, it was also about those who would hear him. The workbench faded into the distance, and he began to see the audience not as a crowd, but as individuals, thirsty for inspiration and kinship. Maybe it's time to quit hiding, he whispered, half to himself as he took a deep breath, grounding himself in the moment. Sarah's smile broadened, acknowledging an unspoken agreement. Anthony's conviction wavered, yet it blossomed, waiting for the call to action. Introspection gave way to action as uncertainty transformed into possibility. The path before him was murky, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. But the thought of facing the world with his truth now ignited a new sense of freedom. And just as clarity pierced through the fog, a realization hit him with unrelenting force. The moment of truth was closer than he realized. He needed to find out not just what he could say, but who he truly wanted to become. Caught off guard, Anthony realized the conference wasn't just some designer affair. It was an opportunity to redefine his existence. With renewed determination, he turned to Sarah, the weight of their connection reshaping the dust of his identity. But could he rise to the occasion and transform that moment into a launch pad for his dreams? The echo of the conference loomed larger than life now, a countdown that pulled him into its gravitational pull, a singular moment that awaited a courageous leap. The weight of the decision hung heavily in Anthony's chest, a palpable reminder of the duality within. He could hear the relentless hum of the garage around him, yet it felt worlds apart from the fervor of an audience ready to listen. Turning his back on years of routine felt both exhilarating and terrifying, but there was also the undeniable allure of embracing a new identity. The next day at the shop mirrored any other, tools clattering, engines revving, but something tinged the air. Determination coursed through him as he moved about his tasks, a spark igniting with each mechanical adjustment. He approached each repair with an unusual vigor, imagining not just the work at hand, but the message he might convey. He could already picture the engaging anecdotes that would animate the facts of mechanical engineering, creating an accessible narrative for an audience eager to revel in innovation. Despite the mundane backdrop of oil stains and toolkits, a new internal discourse emerged. What if he approached his craft not just as a means to survive, but to thrive? Every gasket he fitted became a metaphor for bridging gaps, not just between car parts, but also between perspectives. The engine blocks he handled were no longer mere components. They could teach resilience and ingenuity. Each task unveiled a different aspect of his style, revealing that he was capable of more than he had believed. Yet self-doubt crept in from the corners of his consciousness, unraveling those glimmers. He could already hear the inner critic. What if they laughed? What if his nervousness swallowed him whole during that presentation? It was one thing to speak about concepts in a comfortable work environment. A completely different challenge commandeered the spotlight. As the day dragged on, Anthony found himself gravitating towards Sarah, who was busy organizing a workshop schedule. "You seem different," she noted, her keen eyes assessing his energy. "What's rattling around in that head of yours?" It's like I'm standing on the edge of something big," he confessed, awkwardness thrumming beneath his bravado. He shifted, trying to shape his thoughts into coherent sentences. "I want to share my knowledge, but what if it's not what they're looking for?" Sarah tilted her head, her bewildered expression doing little to quell his agitation. "What you think people want to hear doesn't matter," she said, her voice steady. "What matters is being authentic. Speak from your experience, Anthony. Highlight the humanity behind the grease and grease stains." With a deep inhale, Anthony let her words recharge his resolve. He couldn't deny her insight. His life's work was more than an individual task. It was a narrative infused with struggle, grit, and unyielding passion. Watching the way she moved with purpose soothed the relentless questions sparking in his mind. As he tackled his responsibilities, he replayed their conversation, trying to visualize a new narrative. He could weave tales of ingenuity with a mechanic's flair, intertwining real-life challenges. Shifting gears from nuts and bolts to stories of overcoming doubts mirrored his journey. He envisioned the audience, leaning in closer, perhaps even resonating with his struggles, awaiting solutions and revelations from someone who had walked a similar path. Days turned into weeks, and as the conference approached, Anthony's thoughts grew increasingly affirming. He practiced speaking in front of an imaginary crowd. Each rehearsal unleashed echoes of frustrated laughter in the garage and resonated with midnight conversations about dreams. It was intimate, stepping outside familiar shadows and shaping himself anew, much like the metal he forged. But amid the swell of excitement, a critical inflection arose. What did success truly look like for him? Driving the point hard, was it merely applause and accolades or a surpassing understanding of his own essence? The dilemma of measuring fulfillment unraveled in tandem with his careful plans. He needed clarity more than he needed validation. As opening day loomed, the realization struck Anthony like a lightning bolt. This wasn't just about imparting knowledge, it was about reclaiming a voice he had tucked away for too long. More than just a story to tell, this was a chance to illustrate a journey, one that might inspire others to embark on their own. The crowded room would soon serve as a transformative arena. There, he would grapple with fear head-on, unraveling the core of who he truly was. But as he honed his thoughts into a cohesive expression of self, a new swell of uncertainty brewed. What if stepping into this new role truly changed everything, forever altering his perception of his own limitations? In that moment, with uncertainty swirling, He resolved to not merely participate, but to dominate the narrative of his life. But the question loomed larger than his aspirations. Was he genuinely ready to unveil this revelation and embrace the ramifications that came with it? Anthony awoke each day with a sense of renewed purpose that both thrilled and unnerved him. The steady hands that once only dealt with engines now seemed poised to craft something far more significant, his own voice. He felt like a pilot on the brink of departure, yet he couldn't shake the ominous cloud of doubt hovering nearby. Back at the shop, the familiar sights and sounds welcomed him. Engines roared like restless beasts, and the aroma of metal and grease filled the air. Yet today each sound was amplified, echoing the tension brewing within. As he tightened bolts and adjusted gears, he found comfort in the routine, but his mind was clouded with an incessant questioning. What if I fail? Will my story resonate? Every time he touched a wrench or adjusted a piston, he imagined translating that skill into words that would guide and inspire. Life under the hood had taught him countless lessons, but would anyone truly be interested in the journey of a mechanic? A sudden clang erupted as a tool slipped from his grasp, snapping him back to reality. Despite the noise, an inner voice emerged, steady amidst the chaos. "You won't know unless you try." It was an affirmation he didn't realize he'd needed. After all, countless hours spent in the garage had taught him resilience, a trait that could easily translate to this new endeavor. That afternoon, he decided to approach the conference preparations with the same intensity he applied to fixing a car. He gathered materials, flipping through notes and sketches, letting his excitement build like the rev of an engine. Each outline he drafted morphed into a framework for the stories he wanted to tell. But even as he crafted thoughtful arrangements, there was that persistent specter of self-doubt lurking in corners of his subconscious, whispering that his experiences could never compare to the polished narratives of seasoned speakers. He pondered the lives of those who would sit before him. They were professionals, educators, individuals steeped in well-written accolades. How could he command their attention? It struck him again. Authenticity. If Sarah was right about one thing, it was how vital it was for him to speak from his own humanity. The moments of success were essential, but it was the struggles that would truly draw in his audience. However, committing to authenticity meant exposing himself in ways he hadn't considered. It challenged everything he thought he knew about vulnerability in a professional setting. He felt his heart race as he envisioned revealing not just his triumphs, but the discouraging days, the frustrations, even his mistakes. Those were the moments that defined his craft after all. That evening, wrestling with the weight of these revelations, Anthony found himself hunched over his workspace, a cup of lukewarm coffee neglected beside him. He recalled a particularly bitter day when engine malfunctions nearly drove him away from this life. The sweat, the tears, the embarrassment of calling in help, each of those experiences taught him something vital. Grit and resilience did not just protect you, they propelled you forward. He allowed the memory to inspire his presentation, lighting a fire deep within as he began to type. Each story he wrote was not just a recount of events, it became a testament to the very essence of perseverance. However, beneath that growing excitement lurked his enduring question: was this enough? As the deadline loomed ever closer, he found himself torn between exuberance and trepidation. He needed to confront not just the room of listeners that awaited him, but the very fears that constricted his heart. The day before the conference, Anthony stood before the mirror. The reflection staring back at him seemed so different than the man he had been weeks prior. He was no longer merely a mechanic. He was a storyteller on the verge of transformation. But as this new identity began to take shape, deep down inside, he could sense an impending storm gathering. Would breaking free from his past guarantee the future he hoped for? Or would it unleash an avalanche of self-discovery that could shatter him? With bated breath, he prepared for battle, not against an audience, but against the doubts that had lingered too long. But just as he took a step forward, an overwhelming wave of uncertainty crashed over him once more, and he could feel the ground shifting beneath his feet. Tomorrow would force him to confront everything he had feared. The moment had arrived to fully engage with the unknown, both exhilarating and terrifying. Was he truly ready for the challenge that awaited? Or would the chains of doubt pull him back into the shadows? The morning dawned with an unsettling stillness, a deceptive calm that offered no relief from the storm brewing within Anthony. As he prepared to leave for the conference, the weight of his mission pressed heavily on his chest. He tucked his notes into an old leather portfolio, each page a fragile connection to the man he aspired to become. Yet the doubt still festered, whispering insidiously in the back of his mind. What if it wasn't enough? The drive to the venue felt like a journey into uncharted territory. The streets of the city flashed by, a blur of familiar and foreign alike. The engines thrummed their usual symphony around him, foregrounded by his own heartbeat, a relentless reminder of the anxiety that bubbled just beneath the surface. Would he be merely a nameless face, lost among the voices that echoed with authority? As he parked and stepped onto the pavement, he took a deep breath, steeling himself. Taking a moment to observe the bustling environment, he noticed the confident strides of other attendees, their laughter ringing like bells against the backdrop of seriousness. He envied them. They seemed to embody the very confidence he lacked. The ease with which they embraced their narratives made him question if he belonged. Inside the conference hall, he was greeted by a sea of faces, each animated with their own stories and experiences. The air was charged with energy, but he felt isolated in his fear, a lone island amidst a flood of knowledge and assurance. In this crowd, where every voice seemed to matter, his internal struggle intensified. How could he convince anyone to listen? The schedule displayed the lineup of speakers, all renowned figures with polished credentials. Each name felt like a gauntlet thrown at his feet, challenging him to rise above his natural instinct to retreat into the shadows. He found a corner seat, watching as others took the stage, their speeches met with enthusiastic applause. Each clap pierced his resolve, amplifying the turmoil within him. But as the moments passed, something unexpected began to stir inside. He observed how those speakers, despite their accolades, faltered at times, revealing cracks in their armored confidence. They stumbled over words, laughed off mistakes, and cradled their narratives in imperfections that humanized them. A realization dawned. These moments of vulnerability had a compelling power of their own. His heart raced with a mixture of anxiety and excitement. Perhaps he could weave his own moments of imperfection into the fabric of his presentation. When his time came, the walk to the stage felt impossibly long. Each step echoed his pulse, each breath tasted of urgency. As he faced the audience flooded with bright lights and inquisitive glances, his stomach churned. For a fleeting second, doubt flared. What if he stuttered? What if they mocked him? But as the microphone hovered inches from his lips, he closed his eyes and conjured that familiar voice from within, steady and sure. You can do this. He opened his eyes to the sea of faces, each one a potential ally. And in that moment, a clarity surged through him. Instead of merely recounting his polished successes, he would shed the armor of perfection. He would share the real, unembellished stories, the fears that clawed at him, the engines that stalled, and the lessons that came from failure. It was here, at this precipice, that his story could finally take shape beyond the confines of self-doubt. But just as he began to speak, he spotted a figure in the back, arms crossed, a skeptical eyebrow raised. The air thickened with an unspoken challenge, reminding him that the greatest battle was still within. Would this audience accept the real him, or would they prefer success dressed in glamour? This moment was crucial. It was not just about the words tumbling from his lips. It was about the confrontation of his essence and the lurking spectre of doubt that still held strong. As he pressed on, a new question nibbled at the edge of his resolve. If he failed to connect, what would that reveal about him? He needed to unearth not just the stories of resilience, but confront the deepest parts of himself that still craved acceptance. With one deep breath, he decided to plunge into his narrative. He would lay bare all that he feared and fought against. The room fell silent, and as he began, he felt both the weight of expectation and the exhilarating rush of vulnerability. This was his chance, but would it unveil a path to the acceptance he'd always searched for within himself? As Anthony's words carved through the silence, he felt a tremor of vulnerability crash over him, a sensation both terrifying and liberating. He began with a story from his childhood, the days spent tinkering with old engines, a mere distraction, until it became a source of fascination. Each mechanical breakdown he navigated alone had filled him with pride and taught him an invaluable lesson: the resilience of both machines and himself. The audience leaned in, absorbed, and for a heartbeat, the skeptic in the back melted away. Gaining momentum, Anthony journeyed through failures, the times he had misjudged the mechanics of both life and machines. He recalled the first time he attempted to fix a car without any understanding of how it worked, resulting in a complete disaster. I learned that sometimes it's within those chaotic moments that we find clarity. My own engine stalled, but I didn't stop trying to start it again, he confessed, each word drawing him deeper into his reflection. His heart raced. He began to see the audience differently, not as potential critics, but as companions on a shared journey of humanity. He looked into the eyes of those listening, confusion, understanding, a glimmer of acknowledgement at his quest for acceptance and growth. They were not looking for a polished performance, they were craving authenticity. Yet as he shared these vulnerable stories, shadows of doubt whispered in his ear. What if they were not buying into his narrative? What if he had misread their expressions, and they were merely waiting for him to fail? That apprehension wrapped itself around him like a vice, squeezing tighter with every moment of hesitation. Desperation and determination converged inside him. He recalled a moment from last week when he had doubted his skills entirely, standing in that disheveled garage with a stubborn engine refusing to spark. "I wanted to give up," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I was on the brink of walking away from my passion, but then I remembered the sound of the engine when it roars to life. That's the sound of victory." Suddenly the memory surged with unexpected clarity. This was not just about mechanics, but about life itself. The engine could symbolize his very being, stubborn yet full of potential, waiting for stimulation. And just like that, the words spilled forth, unfiltered and real, embracing the messy reality he once shied away from. "I am not here just to showcase my triumphs. I'm here to celebrate the failures that sculpted my path. Each misstep taught me resilience. Each setback pushed me closer to understanding my worth." Anthony's voice trembled, yet he felt liberated. For the moment, connections blossomed across the room. Smiles broke on faces, nods of agreement floated through the audience. It was as if he had unearthed a hidden thread, weaving them all together in vulnerability. But all too suddenly, he felt a jolt when the skeptical figure in the back didn't soften. Instead, the brow deepened, arms crossed tighter. The tension re-emerged, a blatant reminder that acceptance was still at stake. Pressing on, Anthony knew he was standing at the edge of a cliff. Perhaps the most significant moment of his journey lay right ahead. Would he dare confront the challenge embodied in that figure, risking it all for the acceptance of a single soul? What if he pushed through, not just to connect, but to urge everyone to face their shadows too, to embrace failure as loudly as they celebrated success? With a deep breath, he prepared to address this doubt directly, to lay bare not just his triumphs, but the darker recesses of his struggle. As the room leaned forward, holding its breath, one question burned in his mind. Was he ready to transform his fears into the launchpad for something greater? The gaze of the skeptical figure bore into Anthony like an unyielding spotlight, each heartbeat a painful reminder of the expectations that hung in the air. Anthony could feel the weight on his shoulders. He needed to confront this resistance, not just to win this moment, but to confront the very essence of his self-worth. What would it mean if he didn't? Would he be just another voice drowned in self-doubt, or could he emerge as his true self? He inhaled deeply, centering himself. The audience sensed the shift, and in that silence, a tentative connection formed, like a daring thread stretching toward the skeptical figure. You might be wondering why I share these stories of struggle, why I lay bare my scars, he began, keeping his eyes glued to the figure's unwavering stance. It's because every once in a while we meet a wall that blocks our path. You might be that wall for me tonight. But instead of turning away, I choose to break through. The murmurs in the crowd shifted. Some showed signs of discomfort. Faces squirmed as they witnessed this raw opening. But his resolve only grew stronger. Anxiety churned beneath the surface, but he tightened his grip around those familiar threads of vulnerability and authenticity. What if I told you that each failure, he emphasized, each struggle is a vital part of my toolkit? Just like I collect the tools of the trade in my garage, every setback has added an invaluable tool to my arsenal, equipping me for the next challenge. I embrace each hiccup, each false start. They are my mentors, teachers in disguise. As he spoke, Anthony felt his posture straighten. True power resided in acceptance, not only of successes but also of failures. He envisioned the garage again, the warmth of the engine, the smell of oil. Symbols of his growth echoed through each word now. The connection with the audience widened, each face beginning to soften, turning away from skepticism toward curiosity. Here I am, sharing my engine troubles, and I ask you, what are your engines stalling on? What fears and doubts linger on your repair list? There was a breakthrough in the energy of the room, a palpable shift. Hesitance became an invitation, a call to arms for everyone to confront their own walls. Suddenly, the tension from the back became more pronounced. The figure's eyes narrowed. Anthony feigned a look of confidence, but internally a storm brewed. The fear of rejection vibrated through him, but what if he could turn that rejection into an understanding? You, back there, he gestured, inviting that moment of confrontation. What has stopped you? What darkness are you wrestling with? Silence enveloped the room, a breath held in anticipation. The figure began to unfold some of their defensiveness, eyes searching. Anthony's heart raced. Was this willingness to engage a sign of progress? Perhaps this skeptic held a more profound struggle, one he had yet to understand. As anticipation hung in the air, he pushed himself to lean into the vulnerability of this confrontation. Whatever response came next could either lift him further into connection or drop him back into self-doubt. This felt like the proverbial leap into the unknown. The deeper he probed, the more he might unveil not only another individual's fears, but also aspects of himself he had yet to confront. Let it out, he urged firmly yet gently, knowing there was risk in this opening. We all have engines that stall. It's time to open the hood and see what's inside. As the eyes of the crowd glistened with emotion, waiting for the figure's response, Anthony felt a stirring within, an electrifying sense that he might soon uncover a hidden truth of his own. But would he be prepared to confront what lay beneath? That question shimmered at the forefront of his mind. The moment of truth approached. The stillness in the room became an echo chamber for Anthony's internal conflict. As the moments dragged on, the skeptical figure seemed to draw the attention of the entire audience. It was unnerving. He could almost feel the weight of every judgmental glance, each a reminder of his precarious position. Just as he felt like he would buckle under the pressure, a voice creaked through the silence, delivered with shaky breath. What if I'm not fixable? The words tumbled out of the figure's mouth, heavy with doubt. Anthony's heart raced, not only for the figure's raw honesty, but because the words echoed a fear he had buried in the depths of his own psyche. How long had he fought the same question? He was not just battling this moment, he was confronting a lifelong struggle. Somehow, he had to turn this around, make it into a dialogue that honored both of their vulnerabilities. Fixable. That feels like a harsh term, he replied, softening his voice. We each have a unique set of parts, and I assure you I'm still figuring out my own assembly after all these years. A spark flickered in the figure's eyes, the slightest crack in the armor of skepticism. There was something resonant about sharing the idea of being a work in progress. Maybe the two of them could find common ground, a shared acceptance of imperfection. Failure has never been a final destination, Anthony continued, channeling his uncertainty into a bridge. It's simply feedback, a chance to recalibrate. What makes you feel that way? The air thickened again. The figure seemed to grapple with unseen chains of expectation, a struggle Anthony understood all too well. Each breath pronounced the weight of his own experiences with doubt and stalling engines. He was not immune to hiding behind walls when fear overwhelmed purpose. This was familiar terrain. He wanted to reach out, not just to encourage the figure to respond, but to unbind himself as well. I don't want to be seen as a failure, the figure finally admitted, voice trembling like a disassembled engine waiting for a mechanic's touch. Visibly vulnerable, Anthony sensed the collective release among the audience. His own fears started to unravel a bit. They were peeling back layers, not just one individual but many, and with each new layer, hidden truths began to emerge. Then let's own that fear together, he said with newfound courage, looking around the room, drawing others into the moment. What if we shift the narrative? What if we frame this not as a failure, but as a lesson learned? What can we learn from the engines in each of our lives? Daring to dig deeper, he felt a slight shift in the atmosphere. A few audience members began to nod, murmurs growing softer as the tension eased. Fear began transforming into collective curiosity. But was he prepared to lead this shift? Beneath the momentum, uncertainty still stirred in the pit of his stomach. The prospect loomed large. If he influenced this singular moment to spark change, the implications for his own development were enormous. Think about it, he pushed on. What mechanics do you need to tune up in your life? Let's take a moment, reflect together. What's stalling your engine? A series of quiet introspections followed. Anthony could sense the uncomfortable questioning, not just of the figure, but in him as well. What daunting fears were still lurking in his own engine bay? Would someone dare to push him past his own stalled engine, into the open road of potential? The dialogue was intense, and he could now feel the audience poised on the brink of revelation. He realized he held a chance, not just to elevate someone else's journey, but his own. The moment felt electric, moments before a storm, the realization that diving deeper could roar louder than he ever expected. Just as hope filled the room, he became acutely aware that this was only a beginning. Are you willing to go with me on this journey of discovery? He asked the figure, a challenge seated within an invitation. The stakes had risen. He could either step deeper into his own raw contemplation or hold back. But what lay on the other side of this leap? As the crowd leaned in, he awaited the answer, feeling a shift in himself too, unexpected and promising. Would he hold the courage to embrace both their growth? Decisions loomed in the wake of connection, the air thick with the weight of potential transformation, waiting for a single spark to illuminate the path ahead. The figure hesitated, taking an audible breath that echoed Anthony's own rising tide of anticipation. The silence felt heavy, almost suffocating, as if the audience collectively held its breath, waiting for a decision that would ripple through the room. Anthony's mind raced, fully aware that he stood at a critical juncture, not just for the hesitant individual before him, but for himself as well. In that moment of stillness, something shifted within Anthony. He felt layers of doubt cracking, giving way to an emerging clarity. Perhaps he had spent too long in the shadows of his own insecurities, equating vulnerability with weakness. Now, faced with this raw honesty, he understood it was the very act of being vulnerable that ignited the spark of transformation. It wasn't just the figure who needed guidance. He did too. "I don't know," the figure finally managed, words laced with frustration and uncertainty. It feels like every step I take is in the wrong direction." Those words struck a chord deep within Anthony, reverberating with a truth he had grappled with countless times. Change was uncomfortable. It often felt tortuous and unforgiving. But there was beauty in the discomfort, a chance for revival. With a gentle yet firm resolve, Anthony leaned slightly closer, offering unwavering eye contact. "Then let's redefine what wrong means. Each misstep can be a lesson, a chance to course correct. No one expects you to have it all figured out. Trust me, neither do I," he said, feeling a surge of authenticity. In that admission, he felt an unanticipated warmth radiate. It was a kind of liberation. The figure looked up, vulnerability shifting to guarded curiosity. "But what if I fail again?" "Failure is merely a spectator," Anthony countered, his tone steady. "Every time you fall, remember it's your choice whether to let it define you or to rise one more time." With those words, a faint glimmer of hope flickered in the figure's eyes, a testament to Anthony's awakening. It didn't matter whether that spark held the power to change everything, or if it simply marked the beginning of their shared odyssey. What mattered was that connection, a bridge forged by authenticity. As the discussion unfolded, Anthony asked the audience to volunteer their own struggles, their wrong turns. The dialogue morphed into an exploration of resilience, each confession met with confirmation and acknowledgement. He could feel the walls crumbling, not just around him, but around the entire assembly. Bonds forged through shared experiences of doubt dissolved into open conversations of growth. With each story told, Anthony felt emboldened, sharpening his focus on the lessons learned, the strategies and tools that empowered perseverance. He shared his own moments of perceived failure in engineering projects, each one an opportunity to innovate rather than retreat. That transparency engendered respect, encouraging others to delve deeper into their own narratives, transforming their struggles into shared triumphs. Yet lurking beneath the surface was a nagging question that haunted him. What would happen when the shared vulnerability morphed back into personal isolation? His heart raced at the thought of stepping off that newfound path of connection. The fear of returning to the shadows clawed for space in his mind, a reminder that standing in the light required active participation. As the final stories were shared, he felt an undeniable shift. A collective energy pulsed through the room, a wave of courage surging forth. "What if," he suggested, inspired by the intensity building, "we outline a plan for each of us, a personal blueprint to tackle what's stalling our engines?" Faces lit with intrigue and resolve. Hopeful murmurs swirled, each voice adding depth to the conversation. As Anthony carefully outlined the method, his heart quickened. What if they could embark on a journey together, a structured transformation paving the way? Could he summon the courage to follow through? The prospect of accountability was daunting. What if he stumbled again? But just as quickly he reminded himself this wasn't merely about him anymore. It was a commitment to share in the journey, to hold space for one another. "Together, we can confront what feels impossible," he declared, feeling his pulse stutter with exhilaration. The audience leaned in, hanging on every word, waiting for the next step. But the nagging thoughts lingered, and deep down, Anthony realized he was fighting a duel against his own self-doubt that had yet to congeal into clarity. In facing this next challenge, he could sense the tumultuous tides of destiny looming large. As he took a breath to propose actionable next steps, the weighty question echoed once more. Did he possess the grit to follow through, or would his own fears come crashing down like a detuned engine? In that charged moment it became clear. This was not just an exercise in accountability, it was the embodiment of transformation. And Anthony had the choice to embrace it fully or retreat forcefully into uncertainty. Would he dare to foster that courage? The real challenge awaited just beyond the horizon. Anthony stepped away from the podium, heart racing, but not out of fear. For the first time he felt an exhilarating rush of confidence coursing through him. The audience had transformed from a sea of skepticism into a community of individuals sharing their stories. He had faced his own self-doubt head-on, and it had morphed into shared laughter, nods of encouragement, and enthusiastic affirmations. The moment felt surreal, a beautiful tapestry woven from vulnerability and authenticity. As the final echoes of applause washed over him, Anthony felt a profound sense of completion. It was an achievement that transcended the performance. He had not only opened up about his own struggles, but had facilitated a conversation among others to confront their challenges as well. Now, looking back at what had once been the dusty confines of his father's garage, he realized those tools, hammers, wrenches, and machines, had always represented more than a way to make a living. They symbolized a legacy he could either honor or redefine. He had transformed his narrative from simply being identified as a mechanic to being seen as a storyteller, a thought leader, and most importantly, a person who has embraced growth. For the first time, Anthony understood that sharing knowledge didn't just involve recounting facts and statistics. It rested upon the willingness to be vulnerable. He had conquered the gnawing thread of self-doubt that once held him back, and in doing so, he proved to himself that he was capable of much more than he'd ever dared to believe. Each setback had become a step forward, and each misjudgment had turned into a lesson. As he left the venue, a sense of fulfillment settled in. He had achieved his goal. Standing before an audience, he had shared his truth. The lingering anxiety from earlier was replaced with unmatched clarity. He felt peace in the knowledge that this was not just a one-time event. This was merely the start of an ongoing journey of speaking and inspiring others. Moreover, Sarah's presence throughout this transformative process had propelled him forward, pushing him toward flexing his hidden talents. Their connection had not only opened Anthony's eyes to his potential, but also brightened his path profoundly. He needed to embrace the creative instincts that had long lain dormant, and he now felt capable of doing so. Returning to the garage, his sanctuary no longer felt like a prison. Anthony was fully prepared to explore new avenues of growth, to take on challenges that lay outside of his comfort zone. As he picked a wrench from his toolbox and tightened a stubborn bolt on a vehicle, he envisioned speaking engagements not as moments of vulnerability, but as opportunities to uplift others. He had achieved something monumental. He was no longer just existing, but living a life driven by purpose. The stage before him would serve as a launchpad, propelling him into new realms of idea sharing and inspiration. With the clarity of a mechanic who had repaired an engine back to life, he felt invigorated by the sense of wonder and possibility. Gazing out into the horizon, Anthony knew one thing: this transformation was just the beginning. He voted to embrace every challenge that came his way, viewing them as fuel to keep igniting the engine of his life. The space between failure and success had narrowed significantly, and he looked forward to the road ahead, eager to explore all the detours life would present him. He grinned as he picked up his phone, ready to spread the word about the journey he had embarked upon. It's time to share this story, he thought, and to encourage others to uncover their own hidden potential. He took a moment to post about the conference experience on social media, inviting others to join him. It's not just about mechanics. It's about merging our stories and sharing our truths. he typed, exhilaration bubbling in his veins. The words flowed freely as he reflected on how far he had come and the open road that lay ahead. Subscribe now to join me on this journey of growth and transformation. Leave a like to stay tuned for more episodes filled with inspiring stories, insights, and experiences. Comment below your thoughts and revelations, and let's engage in this transformative conversation together. Share this with friends who need a push to uncover their potential. Don't wait another second to join our burgeoning community. You need to be part of this adventure.